Unit 2 Chemistry split into 7 parts. This is Unit 1, Structure and Bonding. Here is a specification. It's in 2 parts. You may want to freeze this and read through. First of all, you will remember elements, mixtures and compounds. An element is one certain type of an atom. A mixture is when you mix 2 or more elements together. And a compound is when you actually chemically bond 2 elements together. Elements bond to achieve a full outer shell of electron, therefore becoming stable. If they already have a full outer shell of electrons, for example neon, which has 8 electrons in its outer shell, then it will not bond with anything. There are 3 types of bonding we'll look at. The first 2 are ionic and covalent, and later on metallic bonding. First of all, ionic bonding is when you transfer electrons from one metal to a non-metal. And covalent is the sharing of electrons in the outer shell. Sodium is a metal in group 1. Group 1 means it has 1 electron in its outer shell. To become stable, it needs to lose that electron or transfer that electron. When it does lose that electron, it will have 1 electron less and therefore have an overall positive charge and becomes a sodium positive ion. Ionic bonds are formed between metals and non-metals. A good example is sodium and chlorine coming together. Sodium has 1 electron in its outer shell, as we saw in the last slide, and chlorine has 7 electrons in its outer shell. So transferring 1 electron from the sodium to the chlorine atom, you'll get a sodium ion and a chloride ion. Ionic bonds are formed because positive and negative ions are strongly attracted to each other. An electrostatic force pulls them together, and this is known as an ionic bond. Ionic compounds can be made between metals and non-metals. Metals on the left always form a positive ion because they lose electrons, and non-metals always form a negative ions because they always gain electrons. An ionic compound is a giant structure of ions. Ionic compounds that are held together by a strong electrostatic force of attraction, mutual attraction, because opposites attract. These forces are in all directions though, not just 2 dimensions, so it forms a big 3-dimensional lattice. So a structure looks a little bit like this, but this is in 2 dimensions. In 3 dimensions you get a big lattice structure of sodium chloride. A wireframe model is something you've seen in the chemistry lab. This can represent the sodium chloride lattice structure. So the green and the silver are the sodium and the chloride ions. It could be either way. And the metal shows the electrostatic forces between them which holds them together. This is a very, very strong bond which makes it very difficult to break, and therefore salt, sodium chloride, doesn't melt that easily. Covalent structures, covalent bonding is a sharing of electrons to produce molecules and giant covalent structures. Good examples in the specifications are hydrogen gas, chlorine gas, oxygen gas, water, H2O, ammonia, which is NH3, and methane gas, which is CH4. So here's a good example. Chlorine gas, when you have 2 chlorine atoms, they both have 7 electrons in their outer shell. They both like 1 more electron to fill up the outer shell or the outer energy level, and therefore sharing an electron each at the end, represented by the dot and cross matrix here, will achieve that. Each chlorine atom here has 8 electrons in its outer shell. You get chlorine gas. This is called a covalent bond. Covalent bonds are sharing of 1 or more electrons. How can you draw it? Well, you can draw it exactly as I've just shown you, with the dot and cross showing the electrons from one chlorine and the other overlapping, if you like, to share the outer shell of electrons, which means they have 8 electrons in the outer shell. Or you can also represent it without the inner shells because they don't matter, or you can draw it as solid lines as represented in the bottom right hand corner. What do molecules actually look like? Well, you can represent them with models, different models here shown, water and methane at the top there to show the covalent bonds, the sharing of electrons. Molecules made of covalent bonds are very strong, very hard to break. There are some giant covalent structures which are called macromolecules, very large molecules. Examples include diamond, which is a type of carbon, silicon dioxide, which is glass or made of sand. Atoms make many bonds. So for example, in diamond there are 4 bonds, and in graphite, another form of carbon, there are 3 bonds. Here are 2 examples. First of diamond, the 4 bonds between each carbon, just part of it. Each carbon has 4 covalent bonds between each other. And here's a graphite molecule which only has 3 and very loose bonds between the layers. The third type of bonding occurs in pure metals, called metallic bonding. Metals are tightly packed layers of a regular lattice structure, positive ions surrounded by a sea of electrons. These electrons are often referred to as delocalized, meaning they are free to move through the whole structure. This is how metals conduct electricity. Okay, this is the end of the first section. If you want to check back through the specification.